feel like I'm a broken record just going back to people, but quality and the uniqueness of all of the people here create such a massive opportunity for what could wind up being a hire, a partner, an acquirer, investor, any of those things. And so it's just being really intentional about that network and meeting really as many people as you possibly can, because you never know where that kind of special sauce is going to come from in a relationship, like the acquisition. I mean, I didn't show up to AI Collective thinking I was going to make an acquisition. I showed up just trying to learn, and it led to something that, we're 45 days in, seems pretty darn awesome. So I think that there's just opportunities abound with that network of folks that's here.
Welcome to Austinpreneur, our show about the stories that made Austin, Texas a global hub for startups. The show is produced by Capital Factory and hosted by me, Nick Spiller. As a reminder, by joining Capital Factory, you can plug into the ecosystem where the stories on this show were set. Learn more about us at capitalfactory.com. Welcome back to Capital Factory's podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Nick Spiller. Our special guest today is the co-founder and CEO of 512 Financial, firm launched in 2022 that provides fractional finance, accounting, HR, and recruiting services to our favorite thing here at Capital Factory, high growth companies. Before founding 512, Bart built his career in finance and operations. He began in assurance at PwC, held senior finance roles at mid-market software and services firms, and gained a deep expertise and experience in process reporting and scaling operations. Under his leadership, 512 Financial has rapidly grown and expanded its services offering, including a recent acquisition of a company, Hire Better, to deliver strategic talent planning alongside finance and operations support. Today, we'll talk about how founders can move from ad hoc spreadsheets and Slack to robust systems and processes without killing the agility and speed that makes your company unique. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Bart to the Austinpreneur podcast. Bart, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here.
Good to have you. Why don't you start us off? Tell us the origin story of 512 Financial and what inspired you to make the dive and build this company.
Sure thing. Yeah, so as Nick mentioned, we started the company at the beginning of 2022. Prior to that, I had been doing kind of the same core service offering, fractional controllership and CFO work for portfolio companies of my co-founder, Joel Trammell. So he hired me in 2014 when he was the lead investor and board chairman of Packet Design, a routing analytics software, and iGraphics, a business process management software. And he'd been outsourcing the accounting function to, we don't need to name the company, and referred to what he was getting out of that function as random number generator financial statements. Suboptimal as the lead investor and board chairman looking to eventually exit a business. So he hired me to put a team together to support those two companies. So concept was same, shared resources, don't have to, at a 60-person company, maybe you don't need a full-time accounting staff, but you need talent. He wanted accessibility. So we were either literally or proverbially down the hall, and he wanted us to look and feel like employees. So we did that from 2014 to 2021 for those entities. Helped both of them get acquired. One, Packet Design sold to Sienna in 2018, and iGraphics sold to a private equity firm out of San Francisco, Banneker Partners, in 2021. And that was the impetus to take my team and launch 512 Financial.
Awesome. And we know Joel Trammell very well. He's a longtime mentor, investor of ours here at Capital Factory. But for those of you, listening that don't know Joel, you give us a little bit about his background, what makes him awesome.
Yeah, Joel is a older and meaningfully more successful than me gentleman who's been building companies in Austin for probably 25 or 30 years now. The one that I think really elevated him and sort of made him known around Austin at least was he and his wife Kathy started a company called NetQOS in early 2000s, I think, and scaled through, I think it was 31 consecutive quarters of double-digit growth, if I'm getting that stat right, and eventually sold to Computer Associates for $200 million, and then rinsed and repeated with a company called Cash IQ, and sold that after about a year and a half or two. So tons of experience in leadership, management, org design, all of those things. And so having him as my co-founder, a first-time CEO, pretty incredible asset to have with 512 Financial.
And fun connection, Gordon Doherty, who I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the Capital Factor community know, he's our co-founder and chairman. He was the chief strategy officer at NetQOS, led them through the acquisition back in the day, which is a huge, I think that year it was like the biggest acquisition by far in Austin, and created a lot of people that went on to reinvest in the ecosystem. This is great success story. I think Gordon has a blog called A Tale of Two Acquisitions, and we won't get into it now, but like the NetQOS acquisition was really elegant and extravagant in how they pulled it off. And it's just a great story of how startups can win against the big guys. So, all right. So a lot of us here, we're building early stage companies, almost defined by not being defined. We're on the path for product market fit. Things are changing. We're going to iterate and pivot it. How much of the operation infrastructure is important early on versus later? Like, how do you think about the timing at which you implement the processes that you focus on at 512?
Of course, we would advocate to do things like that as early as possible, but that is easier said than done. As many of you, I see lots of nodding heads. Of course, you'd love to have robust systems, but we have finite resources early in our days. So, to me, I think that's one thing that's really important is identifying what are there's lots of metrics. We started working with a company recently that said that they can produce 44,000 metrics. How many of those really matter? And so I think what is really critical is identifying the 4 to 7 that like truly move the needle for your business, and then making sure you have the systems in place to monitor and measure and report on those things. As a 5, 10, 15, 50 even person company, you are not going to have the resources to be able to report on everything you could possibly want, but you got to be able to report on those ones that are critical, whatever. And those are not going to be the same across every business or industry. And so, you and your co-founder or ops manager or whoever it might be, identifying those things and going, all right, like we'd love to have all these other nice to haves when we grow up. But right now we've got to have these 5 to 7.
And how do you make that decision? Like what's important when narrowing in on these core metrics?
Yeah, I mean, again, so it's not going to be the same to any two companies. Some sort of thematically that we see, and you mentioned product market fit. So I'm gonna take like a customer satisfaction one out because presumably you don't really have customers yet. But so maybe it's the velocity with which you're putting out, new features or new product functionality. Maybe it's something around the however few or many employees you do have and their engagement in what you're doing. Maybe it's certainly your cash burn is pretty darn important. So I think depending on the stage of the business, and again, of course, industry, those things are going to differentiate some. But I think, you can get some that are like, what's going to wake me up in the middle of the night? That's kind of a good little litmus test. Like if I'm going to wake up and be like, oh my God, like our employee engagement, our customer sat, where are we going to have cash by the end of December? Those things are probably the answer.
Yeah, and it seems like it's often something within the financial bucket, or kind of a couple within the financial bucket, a couple within like the product technology bucket, and then like something within the team bucket.
Yes,
that really is tailored to your business model, your org structure. So, and then what are some of the biggest growing pains you see startups face? And on the operations side of things, as they kind of move into a more professionally ran organization.
I mean, people is always going to be, I think, maybe even more so here in the era of AI.
Sure.
I think that people are going to be the single source of either the most pain or the absence of pain. It's such a critical investment, and whether that be for building a culture, for building a product, for any number of things, that if you get some of those early hires right, your world and your life are going to be a lot easier. And if you get those wrong, the inverse.
How do you balance people, especially working with a firm like you? If we hire another firm to help us hire, we're not interacting as closely with the candidates, maybe not closely, but obviously you need to know them and make the decision.
Sure.
How involved do you need to be in the hiring, especially if you're working with a recruiting firm or someone else that's helping you with the big load of going through the pipeline?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you want to get in this specific instance that you're asking as far as the hiring process. I think, early on you can work with us, with a recruiting firm, a talent agency, whatever it might be, to take the, large potential group of candidates down to something more manageable. But I mean, we're sitting here 4 years in at about 52 people, and I have interviewed every single person that ever started, and I think it's critical. I don't foresee that stopping anytime soon. Now, I'm not the expert on all of the accounting services or people services, so there are other folks, whether that be external or other people on the team, that do those types of interviews, but I've got to know if they fit with just the types of humans that we have in the room that drive our work product.
So it's like stay involved, bottom of the funnel, but it's helpful to get some support sifting through all the applications and screening out who really is a fit.
Absolutely. And again, whether that's through people or whether that's through AI, there certainly are applications there on the AI side.
What do I need to know as an entrepreneur to communicate with you to be successful in that process? What do I need to know about the people that we're hiring?
So you're saying,
as far as, do you need to know skills, the background, or what do we need to inform you with to make sure that we don't miss anyone in top of funnel when you're screening through applicants?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, context, of course, is everything. And so, and I think it depends to some extent on the seniority of the role. If you're hiring for an office manager, that has a different set of, how deep we need to go is very different than if you're hiring for a chief product officer or chief revenue officer or something like that. But yeah, we strive, and I hope every firm that's supporting in efforts like that strives to really get to know, it's not just about what experience you need, because again, an AI could just get, if they have this, and this on their resume, then that's a good candidate. Mm-hmm. But it's also about how do they fit into the org, what soft skills do they need, and how do we look for those things to present you with really high quality candidates.
Do you see a convergence driven by AI in these sectors that you're supporting with HR, operations? I mean, what does that look like, just a year or two in the future as these processes, these, textbook business functions start to benefit from the technology of AI?
Yeah, I think you've heard from lots of people around, say, things to the tune of AI isn't going to take your job. Somebody that knows how to use AI is going to take your job. And that's sort of how we're viewing it across all of our services. Accounting, HR, talent is that entire life cycle, at least anytime real soon, is not going to be replaced by AI. There have been a few attempts at it, I think specifically on the accounting side of AI bookkeeping, and raised north of $100 million and totally imploded. Right? One was local here in Austin. One was here in Austin. Again, we're not here to name names. And then there was one. There was another one that was more recent. And so, eventually it's going there, right? Yeah. But it's not there yet. So our edict, we think, as a services company, is to be able to evaluate all of those things that pop up. Hey, can this do what it says it can do? And be able to partner with AI teams and or simply LLMs so that we're being as efficient as possible, and then we can deliver the value add services that we want to.
Where have you seen the most obvious impact of AI in your business or the companies that you're helping?
I mean, there are small examples and huge ones. A small one. So I actually the way, and I know we'll get into this later, the way that I got to meet the leaders of Hire Better, who we acquired recently, was through a group called the AI Collective. The AI Collective is started by a local guy here, Jeff Woods, and roughly 150 C-level folks who get together in person once every 4-ish months to talk about how use cases, what's working, what's not working, how to use it as a thought partner, not just a task doer. prompt methodologies, all of those types of things. And so I have tried to take those learnings and apply them into the business, again, so that all of our folks are, fluent, for lack of a better word, in how to use these types of tools. But again, and it also gets back to the people connection. Like, we would have never had the opportunity to do this acquisition if I hadn't joined a collective that had nothing to do with that. It was focused on AI, but lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah. So tell us more about the hire better acquisition while we're at it. How'd that come about?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, AI Collective is kind of where it all started. I got the opportunity to meet Velvet Schmitz, who was the CEO of Hire Better, and Amy Ansira, the Chief Experience Officer. And so I got to meet them, got to know them very well, and just thought the world of them, and thought it would be cool if there's a way for us to work together someday, but didn't really think of anything much beyond that. And then came to learn that their owner, who is local, Kurt Wilkin, I imagine you might have spoken with him on this podcast at some point, but
I don't think so.
Okay, you might need to. So Kurt was, he had been running the business since 2011 and was ready to go find other things, and so it was in fact available, and so we did about 4 months of diligence, both financial and more so on the people side of things, and closed that acquisition at the end of August. So and their whole team, sans Kirk, who, like I mentioned, was ready to do other things, came over. And Amy is now our Chief Customer Officer, and Velvet is our Chief Revenue Officer.
And how does that fit into your broader strategy at 512 Financial?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons to do it, but two fundamental reasons. One, as I alluded to, was the people. So having someone like Joel as your co-founder, we go through quarterly, if not more frequent, exercises in, like, leadership team now as a 25, 30, 40 person company, we have what we need. What do we need to get to 100 people? And how does management need to change? How does the org structure change? And one of the kind of key things is, like, we knew that eventually we needed to have an executive, a sales executive, a customer executive, and a marketing executive. And so somewhere between where we are now, 50-ish, and 100, like, we had to solve for those vacancies, because I was de facto all of them, as I probably, a lot of the folks in here are the chief everything officer right now. And so this was an opportunity to, bring a customer set, bring two really seasoned, talented C-level folks, and women specifically. We had over the course of the last couple of years lost some of our balance there on the leadership team. And so that was a huge part of the decision. And then the other part is that, in general, the way that we lose customers, and I put that in quotes because it's more that they sort of graduate from us.
True.
We join them when they're, I don't know, a couple of people or 10 or 20, and we help them scale to a point where, it's time to hire a full-time CFO, controller, head of HR, whatever it might be. And we have agreed with them and then said, all right, good luck. We'll see you around. Hope it goes well. And so with this acquisition, we now get to go, it is time for a CFO, and we can help you place that.
Yeah.
And it just sort of elongates our relationship and value add for those customers.
So it's in the name, 512 Financial. So obviously focus on Austin, but how much of that is like a very strict focus versus just working with folks all over the state, all over the country?
Yeah, we do work with folks all over the state and country. I think the name, we are super proud of being here in Austin. The good thing with a name or a number like that is that if you're not here, you don't really know what the heck it means. Some people say 512, and we shake our heads and go, no, it's 512. But that was both, opportunistic and intentional. Like, I think a lot of the big companies out there, like, the names don't tell you what they do or who they work with or that they're in a certain geo.
Yeah.
And so it gives people here in Austin some, like, oh yeah, like, that's my local firm. And to everyone else, we're just a company that does, finance and HR services.
Love it. Well, we're going to open it up for questions to the audience in one second. But, if you were an entrepreneur coming out to Tech Week and, looking to get value out of it, what advice would you have for just attending conferences like this and, making sure it's a good use of your time and not just kind of lost in the sauce, going around from session to session?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm a broken record just going back to people, but, I think the quality and the uniqueness of all of the people here creates such a massive opportunity for what could wind up being a hire, a partner, an acquirer, investor, any of those things. And so it's just being really intentional about that network and meeting really as many people as you possibly can, because you never know where that kind of special sauce is going to come from in a relationship.
Right.
And some of the like the acquisition. I mean, I didn't show up to AI Collective thinking I was going to make an acquisition. I showed up just trying to learn, and it led to something that we're 45 days in seems pretty darn awesome. So I think that there's just opportunities abound with that network of folks that's here.
Yeah, just a general network can go a long ways, and you're always just one introduction away from something that's pretty useful, and you never know
where it's going to come from.
Where it's going to come from.
Yeah.
So, here's a question for Bart. Start over here in the corner, and then move our way across.
For the startups, how do you balance the value of equity versus salary? And in your position, as a startup, there's not always a whole bunch of cash flying around. But you also want to create some value for somebody that's going to take a chance on that startup. So, in your position, how do you balance those two things when you're advising startups and making their first few hires?
That's a great question. And I think it also depends on the type of company, where it's going. So I'll give you our internal example of how we handle that, which I think will probably be pretty different, frankly, from some folks here. But we don't have investors. My partner and I started it. We each put $1,000 in the bank account. That was how we started it. And when we were starting it, I asked him the question, like, hey, should we do equity? Should we do employee equity? And he was like, I mean, we could, but it's a little disingenuous. I was like, what do you mean? Like same thing as you. I want there to be value for folks in the company. And he's like, well, look, we're a services business. We're not going to grow at a unicorn clip. We're not going to get a infinite times revenue valuation. And so if we tell our folks, hey, congrats, you've got 1,000 RSUs, they might jump for joy and think that there's a gold pod at the end of the rainbow. And the reality of that is that it's probably not worth a whole lot. And so what we did instead is that we implemented a profit sharing program. And so every 6 months, we look at the result of that prior 6 months, and some of the profit goes to Joel and I as co-founders, and the rest goes to the employees in a bonus that is sort of equal value to everyone. And so that was our version of that. Now, obviously, for a lot of folks here who are looking at raising money and might have the opportunity to grow rapidly and have that, then I think that doing those sort of like phantom units or doing those equity grants is a great tool for retention, and there's real promise at the end of that. I do think you got to be super thoughtful about cap table management, and as you do go about raising money, like what does that do to that pool? Because again, you might start where the 1,000 RSUs have the potential to be very valuable, but then by the time you get to Series B, it's peanuts. And I don't have like an easy answer to that, but it's just something that you have to be, you have to think about your trajectory and be cognizant of, and be transparent, of course, with like what those things may or may not be worth.
So for product development type tools, if you're selling to the government, say, for example, you're a defense tech and you already have contracts, at what point in time should you be solidifying your tools for product development? Like, should you be already continue to be using like the free versions of things, or should you have picked already like, this is a tool that we're going to use and pay for that license, that sort of thing? Like startups are typically need to be scrappy, but at the same time, it's like, when are you really serious?
Yeah. So not having built a product company, I will caveat with that before I answer. But I think it kind of a little bit gets back to what I said about the kind of the core 4 to 7 metrics. Like, if it is something that this is going to be the lifeblood of how you build your product, that's probably the thing that you decided to invest in earlier. There's lots of nice to haves and shiny objects and talented salespeople, but like fundamentally, if you're like, look, this is going to be the thing that drives my ability to succeed as a company, I think you probably make the decision to invest in that earlier than later.
I think if you're selling to the government, and even more reason to be organized up front, and government contracting needs to be a not just a function but a strength of your company. There's like SOC 2 compliance is a big one that comes up early. Palantir is like a platform that you can build right on top of. There's other options too. Palantir is one of our partners here that a lot of companies use that can make some of that stuff easy. But yeah, especially if you're going to be in one of these heavily regulated industries that every contract you get is going to be a whole ordeal, I would, you really can't, like, you got to kind of skip the scrappy part, except for like maybe like very, very, there might be a phase before you engage with the government whatsoever, you can be scrappy, but because it's going to, even when you're clean and organized, there's going to be hiccups and government shutdowns and other things. So you don't want to delay on that. Who else has a question? All right. Just hit new employer.
What was something that you've seen other companies do and just be like, what is something that you would say is a common mistake that you see other companies do that's just an easy rabbit hole to fall down when they're first starting or first scaling?
Yeah. It's a good question. I'm glad we hired her.
That's right.
Common. Well, one that I think this has shifted some in recent years, but I think for a while in tech, there was sort of this belief that there was never-ending capital, and what I mean by that isn't that like can companies still raise money today? Of course they can. But there was a period of time where, whether it be venture capital or private equity, basically had an infinite runway so long as you were growing. And I think that there was a set of founders that were operating businesses from, maybe 2010, maybe 2015, probably 2015, until 23, 24, that was the management structure that they understood. As long as I grow revenue, I will be able to get additional funding. And that was true for a long time. And then I think in the 23, 24 timeframe, VCs and private equity firms started going, well, yeah, growth is great, but when are you cash flow positive? And the companies that are still around to tell that tale today, pivoted and streamlined and made the difficult decisions necessary to have a path to get there. And others went, we're going to keep growing, and that's how we'll get to it. And there is a usually inverse relationship between growth and profitability that I think a lot of folks don't understand. Either there's a thinking that growth and profitability are like, you do those together, and usually that is not the case. And so I think the companies that struggled, including unfortunately some of our clients at the time, thought they were going to grow their way out of that predicament instead of streamline and make the adjustments necessary for that.
There's an upper limit to growth. There's only so many people on the planet that you can sell to, and the way these companies were geared up to you just can't keep growing. And sure, you can go launch like another big business line, but how many, even the best companies, right? Like even like ask Google, like how many of these other big businesses that as like under Alphabet now have really taken off? Maybe like a few, but they're like really, really great example. Uber's another one. Like they've done a bunch of these, but it's like Uber Eats is like one other. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, you got to have a business, and the macro environment's another huge factor. That's like, you're at a low interest rate period for a long period of time, and people could raise all the money, and there's a lot of companies to go get debt to finance acquisitions and like all this stuff that you can do that you couldn't do for a long time. Now we're seemingly going back into another lower interest rate period of some sort. So yeah.
The one other thing I would add to that too is I think that like kind of focus versus like product expansion is another one that's kind of related to that. Where if you try to be everything to everyone, like it's just, there's the whole like jack of all trades, master of none type of thing, versus if you're able to really hone in on what you do well And I think going back to that time when there was that inflection point for investors, I think some of the ones who went, all right, like that over there is just noise. Let's focus on what we really, really do well from a product perspective. That, again, those were the more successful ones.
And you can see there's reports from Carta and other industry reporting groups, just like the funds from 2020, 2021 are the worst performing funds ever. And it's because they, came in at these super high prices, and there's been this long period of time where all the companies have to grow under their britches and get profitable and crash and burn. So it's, I don't know, I think there's fundraising is always hard. And even in 21, it wasn't easy. It's just, there's a prevailing mindset that you have to deal with. And, it shifts here and there, but you don't want to get caught up in the hype that it's easy to raise money, or, this is all going to happen. We're going to continue to raise, because it's just not a guarantee for any of the companies that you see. That's why you see when you see companies do like a $500 million round become super hot. Soronic, an example of this. I don't know the exact numbers, but last year raised like a Series B. It was like it was somewhere around between 250, 500 million. And then it was like only 6 months later, they raised a Series C. It was like 700 million. It's because like they're hot and they were going to go get, is my speculation, interpretation of it is like they're going to get as much money as they can while it's there, knowing that like it may not be there a year from now or something might change. And
when we have folks come to us, we actually just did this the other day. I got a pitch deck from a local company who has done a seed, but they're looking to do Series A, and he does have a big long list, and he has a deck, and I critiqued it somewhat harshly, not as part of our products, just because I want to see him succeed, and I thought I saw some things that, when ABC Ventures throws their analysts to look at the one slide that they all look at before deciding to hand it to someone more senior, like it was very confusing. And so I told him, hey, you're not going to get any bites from that. And I didn't do that that wasn't a service thing. That was just me. And then I said, but once it isn't like that, send it to me. And I gave him a few tips on what I would do. And I will introduce you to the six folks that I think make sense for you. And I don't know if they're on your list or not, but like that I think makes sense based on where you are, how much money you're trying to raise, what the purpose of those funds is, all of those things. And so what I hope happens is that when I send it to those 6 people, 1 or 2 of them is interested. The others go, thanks for thinking of me, but this isn't a fit, but that other firm is. And so I think, and I hope and believe that when you get it into that ecosystem with the right people and they're doing it for the right reasons, that you get to the people you need to get to, if that makes sense.
How did you meet your co-founder, and how do you know it's a good fit to go into business?
I got to meet my co-founder through my father-in-law. As I mentioned, he was the lead investor, board chairman of 2 companies at the time. He was lamenting on, I don't know, the golf course or something about how, man, he really needs a good young accountant to come clean up this mess that he's got. And my father-in-law went, well, Bart's young and an accountant. I don't know about the rest, but Joel, you can figure out if he's worth a grain of salt. But he at least matches those criteria. And so I got to know Joel and came to work for him. Originally, I was his employee, not a co-founder. But what I loved then when it came time to do that is that we have very different skill sets. His is much more vast than mine, but I have a lot more in terms of sort of go to market, energetic. I love networking. I love being around people. Joel, although dynamic on stage, is not really a big fan of some of that component of it. And so to me, it's about like complementary skill sets with a co-founder, and also you do have to enjoy each other to some extent because you're going to spend a lot of time together. Yeah.
it's always best if you can work with them before you go start something.
Yes.
one way or another.
Yes.
So we'll go in the back, and I'm not sure how we're.
I have 2 questions. So one is, if you're software in the licensing industry where you're licensing your design or software, how do you decide on the pricing of the software other than considering the resources and time that you have put in? And the other question would be, if you want to get acquired, how do you approach the potential businesses?
Pricing, not my bag, if we're being honest. I think in general, there's there's value-based pricing, there's cost-based pricing. In your model, probably that's like, do you have a usage or a seat or whatever? I think a really critical thing that that I think some companies get wrong is just like keeping it simple. I mean, there's a lot you can do from a pricing methodology perspective that sometimes makes it like hard to buy and hard to sell. And that will make your salespeople frustrated. It'll make your customers not buy, and all sorts of issues. So again, acknowledging not a pricing expert by any means, but I would just say like there's no need to get extraordinarily creative. Find something that the economics work for your business and try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else pretty quickly. The approaching potential buyers is really interesting, and it depends a lot on the type of acquirer. So the way that you might approach a private equity firm is very different than the way you might approach a competitor or a partner or something like that. And I think they both require a lot of caution. Who's kicking tires and trying to learn about your company versus actually interested in some sort of transaction. And so, of course, things like NDAs are immensely critical. I think some founders want to go fast and forget about little things like that, and can land you in some hot water. To the extent that is a affordable resource for you, yes. And again, I think depending on the size and stage of a company, that may be easier said than done. But to the extent that is within your budget, I do think that's something that's worth doing, just because there is a lot of nuance to that conversation, making someone know that you're available without them trying to feast on that fact.
Time for one more question. Stylo.
Earlier on in the talk, we talked about the different metrics that could be measured for success around a company as they're moving away from spreadsheets, and how they could fall into buckets of being financial, customer focused, or team focused. And while those are so varying business to business, I was curious if you had any recommendations for some of the various platforms that a company or startup would use to attempt to measure, track, and bring that information together outside of Mixhead or Heat for product, where there's so many different tools that could be used. Though, do you have any recommendations or thought processes to approach this?
Sure. So I'll go with one customer one and one internal people one. On the customer side, I think you can spend lots of both time and money on these types of things. We have gone the very cheap approach. So probably a lot of folks here have heard of an NPS, Net Promoter Score. So there's all kinds of, like I said, tools you can use that cost quite a bit of money, but you can accomplish that with Microsoft Forms and summarizing a spreadsheet, And for anyone who doesn't know, NPS is a very simple question of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend a friend or colleague to 512 or to your business? And 9s and 10s are promoters, 7s and 8s are neutral, anything 6 or below is a detractor. So it's very simple data that you don't need any fancy system to do. That's very telling about how your customers are perceiving, your offering. On the people side, there's two things, one of which can be free, but doesn't have to be. So the Gallup Q12 survey is it's 12 questions that you can ask your employees to gauge their engagement. And there are things like, I have what I need to do my job. My manager has talked to me about progress in the last 7 days. Things like that. I don't remember all 12 questions. And again, so you can buy software to manage all of that, or you can send your employees the questions and summarize and go, all right, from when we did this in March to when we did it in September, here's the trends. We did that well, we did that poorly. Here's what we're going to do about it. So that's all can, and I think maybe should be, at least at the stage that a lot of us are in, free. And then one that's slightly more than free that we partnered with recently that I'm super thrilled with so far is a company called Say Hi. It's another employee engagement platform. This is daily feedback from your employees. First thing that in the morning when you open your computer, there's some question that you rate from disagree to strongly agree, and it just collates that data. And so we've only been doing it for a month, and we've got 1,500 questions answered and tons of insights about, and it takes the employees 3 seconds a day. And it costs us, $15 per employee per month. So not free, but not breaking the bank either. I think that's a good way to summarize that, yeah.
It's the key thing is getting people to use it consistently. All right. Join me in thanking Bart for coming on the Awesomepreneur podcast. Thank you, Bart. Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for listening to this episode of Awesomepreneur. Don't forget to check out capitalfactory.com to learn more about us and join our community. If you have thoughts about the show or ideas on how we can work together, reach out to me directly via email, nickspiller@capitalfactory.com. Shout out to the Capital Factory Dream Team for making this podcast possible, and special thanks to Aaron Handworker, who masterfully recorded and edited the show. Come back next week for a whole new episode.